What has gone wrong with the current coronavirus pandemic? I was asking myself, what would an alien civilization think that was watching Earth right now? And I think they would think that at the core of this pandemic is a tragic display of how little action we took as a whole compared to how much we actually knew about viruses and how much we knew about how to deal with viruses. To understand what I mean, let me put things into some context. The one remarkable thing we humans have going for us is our ability to understand almost anything about the world around us. Our ingenuity to, in a way, manipulate nature down to the very tiniest organisms, all directed towards making our lives and the planet better. We may be able to fly across the world at virtually the speed of sound, but we have not transcended even our most basic biology. If you want to defeat a virus, you still have to essentially bluff your own body into fighting it. You have to rely on the immune system to fight it. So we're still completely at the mercy of nature, and we have to really understand that and act accordingly. The knowledge that this virus ticked the boxes, had all the characteristics to become the next global pandemic, was there in January. The pandemic response protocols were there years before, in fact. They laid out specifically at which stage of the spread of a virus, under which circumstances, governments have to take which precise actions. One such crucial yet very simple action was that governments had to start producing medical equipment when they first hear about a virus overseas. The knowledge that the ball started rolling and that given the mathematics and the infection rate that its only and final destination as a mathematical certainty was that without taking any measures, billions of people would be infected, millions dead, and trillions of dollars lost. The only way to escape the gravity of that situation was to boost out of it like a rocket escaping Earth's gravity with enough energy, so to speak. This is the most important point that all other things needed to tie into. Obviously, you don't study for an exam to fail it less, but only to pass. We all had to stop moving around to starve the virus out. And when there are few enough cases, you can contact trace them and keep things in check. But we had to reach a certain threshold. Enough of society had to completely change their behavior. And in order for people to change their behavior, they need to be educated. They need to understand what is going on. It had to sink into their psychology, trigger something, trigger actual, somewhat radical behavior change. This is all even in pandemic response protocols, that you have to tell people that serious disruption is coming to their lives for a short period of time. You have to prepare them. You have to tell them that they will be compensated financially. This is all in the documents. People needed to go, oh, we need to make an actual serious sacrifice here. We cannot go out into the sun and enjoy the park with our friends because 100 cases is already too much. We understand what is going on and we are making a sacrifice. Okay. And not after thousands of cases where it's obvious to anybody. There's even the first study now out of China that shows how much knowing about the virus is related to positive attitudes towards behavior. And there just hasn't been enough energy to convince people, from experts to authorities to politicians. We expect from students at university to know all the key points about big topics and to make magnificent PowerPoint presentations with colors and engage all the other students. Experts, authorities and politicians have been so far from actually convincing people enough. Politicians know how to go on famous YouTube channels and talk shows, and they know how to hold rallies, and they know how to convince millions of people that they're gonna change the country. So what on earth did they actually do here? We had Trump completely misunderstanding almost everything about this virus and saying that it will magically disappear.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
We had Boris Johnson, who was so proud of going around shaking coronavirus patients' hands from patient to patient to patient.
I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody.
These politicians are centuries away from what we should have today, and there were very few that followed the science and the protocols, and overall simply not as well as they could have. Now, politicians naturally worry about their popularity and about their votes, but the weeks it took to react was really like telling people to run after the first wave of tsunami, and that is really what happened. Weeks when it takes hours to call up experts and figure out what is actually going on, to call people in China and ask why is public life shut down? Did they do that for fun or because the mathematics looked so grim? My grandmother knew at the end of January that Wuhan was shut down. So there really was no excuse for any politician to have not been informed about anything. It's not even about the wrong actions. It is about, as a whole, who we are as a human species. We aren't near as smart as we could be, considering our incredible path of science and progress. Diseases have always plagued humankind, have led to the fall of great empires. Smallpox alone in the 20th century has killed 300 to 500 million people. These diseases are nothing new. There's this amazing story of Jon Snow, not the one from Game of Thrones, who in 1854 tirelessly catalogued all the cholera cases in that outbreak back then. And he realized that all the cases were connected to a single well in Soho in London. And he realized that that well was built a bit too close to another home's cesspit, where a family lived that had a baby with cholera, and they just threw the nappies in that cesspit. So he was the first person, through science, to link cholera to water and to feces. Through vaccines, we learned to protect ourselves against viruses and diseases that regularly kill 25% of the human population. In 1796, Dr. Edward Jenner first proved that inoculating one person with another person's cowpox through the pus, granted a bit disgusting, made them immune to smallpox. Now, a century later, Louis Pasteur showed that by having weakened strains of bacteria, weakened viruses, you could also make people immune. There was a famous story where he used to apparently go up to dogs with rabies with assistants and hold the dogs down to get some saliva out of their mouths. The HIV crisis painfully taught us how seriously we have to take public health education. We now understand so much about viruses, so we can even see what the coronavirus looks like. We can see its protein shell and how it's shaped. We have several different approaches of vaccines. We can inject people with protein-based vaccines that have a protein that is shaped like that coronavirus protein to get the body to produce antibodies and get an immune response. We have all this beautiful knowledge, this mind-blowing science. We need politicians who are not only public speakers but who understand science. In fact, we all do. We need to know how to read papers. We need to know how to read reports and look things up and to understand what is true and what is false. And we have to be able to break out of our confusion. So I'm going to end my assessment with a famous quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson. Ignorance is a virus. Once it starts spreading, it can only be cured by reason. For the sake of humanity, we must be that cure. Thank you.